Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, February 7, 2022. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz meeting with President Joe Biden at the White House. President Biden saying at the top of the agenda was the united approach deterring Russia's threats against Ukraine and the long-standing principles of rule-based international order. Chancellor Scholz saying that there would be a high price for Russia if it invades Ukraine. But there are questions about how far Germany is willing to go to confront Russia. We'll talk about that, the complicated relationship between the countries, with USA Today White House reporter Matthew Brown. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy announcing his state will lift its school mask mandate due to a falling number of COVID cases. But the governor is emphasizing that any local school district can still require masks, and any student, teacher, or school worker can choose to wear one. President Biden's top science advisor, Eric Lander, apologizes after a White House investigation finds he bullied and demeaned staff in his office in violation of White House workplace policy. And in Great Britain, celebrations, including with cannon fire, for Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. From Reuters, they write the United States and Germany on Monday sought to present a united front against potential Russian military aggression in Ukraine, with President Joe Biden declaring the two in lockstep despite questions over Berlin's commitment to scuttle an important energy pipeline. Here is President Biden as he opened a joint news conference at the White House with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Today, the Chancellor and I discussed our close cooperation and developed a strong package of sanctions that are going to clearly demonstrate international resolve and impose swift and severe consequences if Russia violates Ukraine's sovereignty and its territorial integrity. And I want to thank Germany and all of our other partners in Eastern Europe and the European Union for their work in this united effort. We are in agreement that it cannot be business as usual if Russia further invades. We also discussed our shared commitment to NATO's Article 5 responsibilities and reassurance of our eastern flank allies. We're united in that as well. Already, the United States is sending troops to reinforce the alliance, and I want to thank the Chancellor of Germany for hosting additional U.S. forces and for the long-standing hospitality to our women and men in uniform. We also discussed the challenges we're facing to the international order from China, along with Russia and other competitors that are pursuing more illiberal futures. We've agreed that Germany and the United States will continue to work together to ensure that the rules and principles governing emerging technologies are geared to advance freedom of opportunity, not repression or authoritarianism. We also reaffirmed our commitment to completing the work of integrating the Western Balkans into the European institutions, and to finally realize a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. With Germany holding the presidency of the G7, we also talked about how that forum can harness the world's leading democracies to advance a robust agenda on global challenges, from ending the pandemic to addressing climate change.
President Biden standing beside the German Chancellor at the White House. The meeting and the news conference coming as Russian troops have amassed near Ukraine's border. Russia denies it is planning an invasion. Reuters article also mentioning that Chancellor Scholz's popularity in Germany has plunged 17 percentage points in recent weeks as tensions ratcheted up with Moscow, and that questions remain about Scholz's willingness to implement sanctions against Russia or terminate the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Russia and Germany if Russia does invade. More to the two leaders at the White House from reporters.
Mr. President, I have wanted to ask you about this Nord Stream project that you've long opposed. You didn't mention it just now by name, nor did Chancellor Scholz. Did you receive assurances from Chancellor Scholz today that Germany will in fact pull the plug on this project if Russia invades Ukraine? And did you discuss what the definition of invasion could be? And then Chancellor Scholz, wenn ich Sie fragen darf,
if I may ask you, Chancellor Scholz, you said there was some strategic ambiguity that was needed in terms of sanctions. I just wanted to know whether the sanctions you are envisaging and the EU is working on, and the US as well, are already finished, finalized, or is there still work ongoing? And
dass Sie das nicht sagen wollen, was genau da drin ist.
You're not really saying what the details are. Is that just an excuse for Germany maybe to not support the SWIFT measures?
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Thank you very much for your question. I want to be absolutely clear. We have intensively prepared everything to be ready with the necessary sanctions if there is a military aggression against Ukraine. And this is necessary. It is necessary that we do this in advance so that Russia can clearly understand that these are far-reaching, severe measures. It is part of this process that we do not spell out everything in public, because Russia could understand that there might be even more to come. And at the same time, it is very clear we are well prepared with far-reaching measures. We will take these measures together with our allies, with our partners, with the US, and we will take all necessary steps. You can be sure that there won't be any measures in which we have a differing approach. We will act together, jointly.
This is a good idea to say to our American friends, we will be united, we will act together, and we will take all the necessary steps, and all the necessary steps will be done by all of us together.
Today to turning off and pulling the plug on Nord Stream 2? You didn't mention it, you haven't mentioned it.
As I already said, we are acting together. We are absolutely united, and we will not taking different steps. We will do the same steps, and they will be very, very hard to Russia, and they should understand.
More on the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz meeting with President Biden at the White House. We're joined by Matthew Brown, White House reporter for USA Today. Thank you for being with us. You write about how the Chancellor has had to navigate between Germany's ties and loyalty to NATO on one hand and the economic and other links between Germany and Russia on the other. How has that played out?
Definitely. So Germany has a long historic and economic relationship with Russia, dating all the way back to the days of the Soviet Union and even before then in some cases. That has meant that at times, especially given Germany's dominance in European affairs, as well as its close economic ties with Russia, that it has had to navigate the situation in Ukraine by simultaneously joining its Western and NATO allies in criticizing the Kremlin for its military buildup against Kyiv, while also attempting to maintain strong economic relations on situations like Nord Stream 2, which the German government has so far allowed to continue, if only with some regulatory stops.
And what has been the White House response over the past couple of weeks to how Germany has been doing this?
Yeah, so Germany has been roundly criticized on both sides of the Atlantic for not showing as many, would say, more resolve or opposition to the Kremlin's actions. The Biden administration has clearly pushed German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's new administration to take a more strident line on this. But they're also very clear to say that they understand that the Germans are in a difficult situation here at times, where Germany has a long history since the Second World War of being a pacifist country that sees its role in this situation as diplomatic, not military. At the same time, though, they have stressed that they are willing to back up their NATO allies in places like Lithuania, where they're going to shore up a NATO operation there. The Biden administration is attempting to work with them basically in the confines of what Scholz is willing and can do given the confines of German politics and German history. At the same time, though, Eastern allies like Romania, the Baltic states, and Kyiv itself are saying that oftentimes the German relationship with Russia is showing, timidity and taking a back seat to other powers such as the United Kingdom, France, and the U.S., who are sending weapons to Ukraine and being much, much more forceful in pushing back on Russian aggression.
Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in the job only a couple of weeks, taking over for somebody who was there for a decade and a half. How has he approached this a little bit, or has he approached this differently than Angela Merkel?
Yeah, so Scholz has some very big shoes to fill. Angela Merkel was a huge presence on the world stage for nearly 2 decades and a stabilizing force inside of Germany. Scholz actually campaigned, though, on being Angela Merkel's successor. He worked as finance minister in her government, and in many campaign ads actually imitated several of the stances that she was so known for, basically saying, while he and his Social Democrats are going to bring, domestic change to Germany and change a lot of the policies that people had believed had become calcified under Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, they were also very clear to say that on the world stage, there was going to be stability in the mold that Merkel brought. That's one of the things that people most liked about her. That's also the reason why in this crisis you're seeing the coalition's poll numbers that Scholz is leading drop in Germany, because that was one of the primary things that they promised to the German people, was that the stability that Angela Merkel brought to the European Union, to NATO, to global democracy in general, is what they really, really liked about her. And Scholz is being tested only 2 months into his administration on whether he can actually fully deliver that.
We're talking with Matthew Brown with USA Today. Besides Russia and Ukraine, which is obviously the large issue, what else between the U.S. and Germany is being discussed with this visit?
Yeah, so Germany is one of America's closest allies, obviously, in this day and age. And that means that a lot of the big global issues that are facing the Biden administration are also facing Germany, and they're going to be collaborating on those. The White House has said that the two governments are going to be talking closely about how to continue to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, what climate change initiatives that they can be doing, and how to really shore up, in President Joe Biden's own words, really protecting global democracy and engaging in this democracy versus autocracy dynamic that Biden and many of the U.S.'s close allies see as a major defining dynamic of the 21st century.
Matthew Brown, White House reporter for USA Today. Find his stories at usatoday.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
And while President Biden met at the White House with the German Chancellor, up on Capitol Hill, the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell made it clear that he wants Germany to be tougher and in closer alignment with NATO countries in standing up to the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Chancellor Scholz has plenty of tools at his disposal to join his allies in seeking a strong signal to Putin that aggression against Ukraine would carry a tremendous cost. So let's take one example. A bipartisan chorus in Congress has opposed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline for years. We have viewed it as a new geopolitical tool for Putin to undermine Ukraine and divide Europe. Germany acknowledges the international community's concerns, hence German delays in moving the project forward. It would be a powerful demonstration of German leadership for Chancellor Scholz to declare firmly and simply that Russian escalation in Europe will result in the termination of Nord Stream 2. Not another pause, the end of the pipeline, period. Likewise, it would send an important message if Chancellor Scholz commits, like other NATO allies have done, and like his own predecessor's national security advisor just recommended, that Germany will help Ukraine with legitimate military capabilities so that it can better defend itself against aggression.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader on the Senate floor. More on the diplomacy that does continue with Russia in an effort to keep the peace. Monday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken held a news conference at the State Department in Washington with the European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell.
A question about diplomacy for you, Mr. Blinken. The US and Europe are pushing Minsk as the solution, while Ukraine is completely against it. Do you still think a measure of autonomy for Donbass, the autonomy stipulated in the agreement, is the way to go? And a question for you, Mr. Borrell. You're welcome to comment on that as well, but with regards to security, does the EU agree with the US assessment that a potential imminent invasion of Ukraine is in the cards? If so, why isn't the EU raising the same alarm as the Americans? And if not, do you have a different assessment of the situation?
Thank you, Barbara. I'm happy to start. With regard to Minsk, the United States and Ukraine are united in believing that Minsk is the path forward to resolve the conflict in the Donbass that was created by Russia's invasion in 2014, and best way to restore Ukraine's border, to restore its sovereignty, as well as to uphold the rights of Ukrainian citizens, including those living in the Donbass. Repeatedly over the last years, Ukraine has sought to move forward with the implementation of Minsk. The Normandy format, as it's called, with France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia involved, has been the principal vehicle for trying to advance that. I think if you look back over the requirements established in the Minsk agreements, 3 agreements over the course of several months, it is a fair assessment to say that Ukraine has sought to move forward on most, if not all of them, while Russia has made good on virtually none of its obligations under Minsk. But in all of my conversations with our Ukrainian counterparts, they remain committed to it. There was recently a meeting of senior officials in the Normandy format. Ukraine continues to put forward good faith ideas on how to move forward. Minsk does not spell out some issues of sequencing when it comes to the steps that the parties need to take. Ukraine has been approaching this in good faith. We have not, to date, seen Russia do the same. The agreements speak of special status for the Donbass, and I believe that with the appropriate sequencing, Ukrainians would be prepared to move forward. But again, the overall picture on Minsk since 2014 has been one in which Ukraine has sought to move forward on most of its requirements and commitments. Russia has not.
Thank you for your question. We share a strong concern about the risks that are accumulating in the Ukrainian-Russian border. And certainly we are living, to my understanding, the most dangerous moment for the security in Europe after the end of the Cold War. But at the same time, we believe that there is still room for diplomacy. There is still room for discussing, for knowing which are the concerns of everybody, also the Russian concerns, in order to avoid the worst. Be prepared for the worst and try to avoid it. Nobody masses 104,000 soldiers heavily armed in the border of a country at the same time that you state about the independence of this country in a way that certainly represents a strong threat. 140,000 troops massed in the border is not to go to have tea. So we have to increase our efforts in order to avoid a big risk for the peace and security. I haven't finished yet. Minister Lavrov has sent a letter to all members of the European Union, to the member states, about it, asking for taking into consideration the security concerns of Russia. I am coordinating the answer to this letter, and I am insisting on the fact that there is still room for a diplomatic solution to the crisis.
Josep Borrell is the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, also Vice President of the European Commission, visiting the U.S., meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department in Washington. This from the Associated Press. International efforts to defuse the standoff over Ukraine intensified Monday with French President Emmanuel Macron holding talks in Moscow, while German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was in Washington to coordinate policies as fears of a Russian invasion mounted. Macron called for de-escalation as he began talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. Dialogue is necessary because that's the only thing that will help, in my view, to build a context of security and stability on the European continent, Macron said. Putin, in turn, hailed France's role in shaping European security and noted he appreciates Macron's efforts to help ensure an equal security in Europe and broker a settlement to the Ukrainian crisis. Russian leaders said, "I realize that we share concern about what's going on in Europe in the security sphere." Back in Washington at today's U.S. State Department regular briefing with spokesman Ned Price, was asked about Macron meeting Putin.
Let me also ask you about Macron's meeting with Putin today. What sense does the U.S. have about what Macron was going to try to bring up once the cameras left the meeting room? Has Ambassador Sullivan and his team been able to get a readout from the French on how willing Putin is to back away in this crisis?
Well, when it comes to the engagement of our partners, let me make the broader point that over the past month plus, we have heard from our European allies, we've heard from our Ukrainian partners, we've heard from others, an appreciation for what the United States has been doing with Russia diplomatically, and that includes in our bilateral engagement. And in expressing that appreciation and understanding, we've heard from our allies and partners that they have taken that approach because we have done all of this in a manner that is thoroughly coordinated, that has been consultative in its approach with our allies and partners, and that is conducted in full transparency with them. Nothing about without is not just a mantra for us. It is the guiding principle in terms of how we have conducted ourselves, including in our bilateral engagements with Russia. So similarly, we would welcome any diplomatic efforts that are conducted in a similar manner that have the potential, to de-escalate the crisis that Moscow has needlessly precipitated. When it comes to the French, as you know, President Biden yesterday had an opportunity to speak to President Macron. This would be his second conversation with the French president in several days. Secretary Blinken yesterday spoke to the Foreign Minister Le Drian. We are well coordinated across the board, and that includes with the French, with Paris. The result of all of this is that the message President Putin is hearing from the United States, from NATO, from our allies and partners, it is loud and it is singular. And that is the fact that a diplomatic solution is the only responsible path. But again, if Russia chooses otherwise, we will be prepared. We will be prepared with a response that is swift, severe, and united. I saw President Macron made comments just before he left. You will hear those same messages from the French president.
The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price. Pentagon also held a briefing. The press secretary there, John Kirby, saying that Russia has added sizable forces near the Ukrainian border, even just over the course of the weekend, and are now well north of 100,000. Kirby said that it's not only infantry and tracked vehicles, but also artillery, long-range fire, also air and missile defense, and special operations. Kirby calling it a full suite available to him, referring to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it continues to grow every day. You can find all of the briefings archived at our website at cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a minute. Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A White House review, writes the Associated Press, found credible evidence that top scientist Dr. Eric Lander violated its safe and respectful workplace policy, but the administration plans to keep him on the job after giving him counseling. An internal review last year, prompted by a workplace complaint, found evidence that Lander, the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and science advisor to President Joe Biden, bullied staff and treated them disrespectfully. Lander left his position as founding director and president of the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, based in Cambridge, to join the White House. Some questions about all this today to the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki.
So So regarding Dr. Lander, I wondered if he should have been reprimanded more strongly given the president's pledge on his first day in office to, fire anybody who mistreated their employees.
Well, let me just give you an overview of what we have done to date. And I know there may be more questions on this, of course, which we welcome. The President has been crystal clear with all of us about his high expectations of how he and his staff should be creating a respectful work environment. One of the steps we took early on in the administration was to institute a safe and respectful workplace policy across the executive office of the president, something that was done early on. It was because of this policy and this process that when the complaint was filed, a full and thorough investigation was conducted pursuant to that policy. In addition, following the conclusion of the thorough investigation into these actions, senior White House officials conveyed directly to Dr. Lander that his behavior was inappropriate and the corrective actions that were needed, which the White House will monitor for compliance moving forward. I'd also note that Dr. Lander also sent a message to his staff outlining some of the steps he's intending to take to build a respectful work environment, and certainly we would encourage those. And again, the senior team will be watching for compliance to these steps.
It looks like he's had a history of, possible mistreatment of his employees over a long period of time. How can you be sure that this reprimand will stick?
Well, I would just reiterate again that, let me start with the first part of your question. Each nominee undergoes a thorough vetting process as a part of their nomination and confirmation process. And of course, we look carefully to ensure each candidate's suitability for the role they're chosen for. Dr. Lander's record was thoroughly examined as a part of his confirmation, and he received bipartisan support, including final confirmation with a voice vote. But again, once we were made aware of the complaint, we launched a thorough investigation, and compliance with the recommendations will be required in this regard.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. The first to report on this story, Politico, as it was preparing its story on Friday. Apparently, Dr. Lander sent out an email apology to staff, also obtained by Politico. It includes the lines, "It is my responsibility to set a respectful tone for our community. It's clear that I have not lived up to this responsibility. I have spoken to colleagues within OSTP in a disrespectful or demeaning way. I am deeply sorry for my conduct. I especially want to apologize to those of you who I treated poorly or who were present at the time." New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, Democrat, announcing plans to lift the statewide mask requirement in schools. He tweeted Monday morning, "Balancing public health with getting back to some semblance of normalcy is not easy, but we can responsibly take this step due to declining COVID numbers and growth in vaccinations." He followed up with a news conference in the capital city, Trenton.
We are removing the statewide requirement that all students, educators, staff, and visitors wear masks while indoors, again effective March 7th. We are not removing the ability of individual district leaders to maintain and enforce such a policy within their schools, or any private child care provider from maintaining such a policy within their business, should community conditions require. Likewise, any student, educator, or staff member or visitor who chooses to continue masking up while indoors may freely do so. And we expect that schools will take swift disciplinary action against those who may try to demean or bully anyone who chooses to wear a mask. We will not tolerate anyone being put down by exercising their choice to mask up. We can responsibly take this step given the continuing drop in new cases and hospitalizations from Omicron, and with all the evidence projecting a continued decline over the coming weeks. And we are also buoyed by the continued growth in vaccinations and the expectation that the vaccines will be made available to children under the age of 5 in early March. And we strongly encourage parents of school-age children to have your child vaccinated.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy in Trenton. New Jersey among about a dozen states with mask mandates in schools, and today as well, the governor of Delaware, John Carney, also a Democrat, announcing he'll be lifting the mask mandate. On Wall Street, the Dow up 1, NASDAQ down 82, S&P down 16. Frontier Airlines offering to buy Spirit Airlines in a $6.6 billion deal to create the nation's fifth largest carrier and provide travelers more low-fare options to destinations in the U.S., Latin America, and the Caribbean. And U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, chair of the Finance Committee, says the IRS is, at his request, moving away from using controversial verification software ID.me amid concern over the company's use of facial recognition technology. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is reacting to the Republican National Committee's censuring of two House Republicans who sit on the Select Committee investigating the January 6 attack on the Capitol. Those two are Liz Cheney of Wyoming and Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Senator Schumer speaking on the Senate floor.
And on an entirely different matter. Normally, Madam President, I don't make a point of remarking upon actions and statements of the Republican National Committee, which by now has completely fallen under the control of former President Donald Trump and his inner circle. But last week, they crossed a line, issuing a statement that censured two Republicans who stood up to the big lie, while also describing the insurrection of January 6th as, quote, legitimate political discourse. Their statement didn't even make mention of the violence that day. There's no debate to be had here. January 6th was an armed insurrection. It was an attempt to reverse through violent means the outcome of a free and fair election. And it was fundamentally rooted in Donald Trump's big lie that the election of 2020 was illegitimate, which now the RNC seems to be giving its blessing officially. For the National Committee of one of America's two major political parties to officially sign on to the big lie, and more than that, to excuse the attack itself by attributing even a shred of legitimacy to it, is chilling and plainly dangerous. It puts us on a road where our democracy is at risk. It's a sad commentary on how far the political arm of the GOP has gone, that the RNC will go out of its way to punish its own members who spoke out against the former president's lies while defending the rioters who tried to undo an election with mob rule. Theirs will be nothing less than everlasting shame.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, speaking today on the Senate floor. It was on Friday that the RNC meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah, did pass that resolution censuring those two House Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. It was also on Friday that former Vice President Mike Pence told a Federalist Society meeting in Florida that former President Trump was wrong to suggest that he, Pence, had the power to declare Trump the winner of the 2020 presidential election during the January 6th counting of the electoral ballots that showed Joe Biden the winner. We covered both of those events, the RNC meeting and the Federalist Society, and the video can be found at cspan.org, our video library. This morning, we spoke with the Hill's congressional reporter Christina Marcos about how elected Republicans have been handling former President Trump's claims and also what else is going on in Congress this week.
The strategy generally taken by Republican leaders on Capitol Hill is to try to sort of take a middle ground with Trump where they don't necessarily agree with his more extreme comments, like suggesting that Pence had the right to overturn the election, and that was what Trump wanted him to do on January 6th of last year. But they also recognize that the former president remains incredibly popular with the Republican base, and so it's not in their political interest to alienate him either. And so it was striking for Pence to openly disagree with Trump like that in his speech to the Federalist Society on Friday. And this puts even more pressure on these discussions in the Senate to reform the Electoral Count Act, which is the law that governs the congressional process for formally counting the Electoral College votes to certify a presidential election. And so that's going to be even more difficult for those Republicans who are in talks with Democrats right now to make some of these reforms.
Where are we on that? When are we expected to see some language or where those reforms could go?
It could take some time. A group of top Democrats who are on committees with jurisdiction to this issue released a proposal last week outlining some of the things that they'd like to see. So, for instance, clarifying that the vice president does not have the authority to intervene, and that all they really have is just a ceremonial role overseeing the process, just for example, and to make it more difficult for any lawmaker to launch an objection to any state's election results. So that's already out there, but there isn't exactly a timeline established by the Republicans and Democrats who are negotiating this right now. It's a small group, but we could see that in a matter of weeks, since Democrats are looking for some sort of reform that they can put forward in the absence of their larger voting rights package that is currently stalled in the Senate.
You mentioned Steny Hoyer. There was an announcement last week that he had contracted COVID. How is he doing? Do we know an update at this point?
Well, he's had multiple media appearances in the last week since he announced that he tested positive, and he said that he's doing it's like a moderate cold, more or less. So he's doing pretty well enough to be going on television and giving updates on the House schedule. But regardless, the House has set up a proxy voting system since 2020, where lawmakers can cast votes remotely if they're not able to be in the Capitol in person. So any lawmaker absences in the House don't affect passage of legislation or anything like that. They can still maintain their usual operations. In the Senate, however, they don't have that. And so any absence by one senator can affect their operations in the upper chamber.
And certainly an absence right now in the Senate chamber impacting the Senate majority schedule, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, it was Senator Benry Lujan recently had a stroke, and so he's expected to be out of the Senate for at least a month, possibly up to 6 weeks. So that in any event, President Biden isn't expected to nominate a Supreme Court nominee until the end of this month, around that time. So it's not likely to impact their ability to confirm a Supreme Court nominee. But it just underscores how fragile Senate Democrats' majority is with just that 50-50 split.
We ended last week talking about the House vote on the Competes Act, the America Competes Act, focusing on China. The Senate passed their version of that legislation, I believe it was last summer, but now the two versions have to go to conference. What is the schedule for that, and is that something that Senator Lujan's absence in the Senate could impact?
Well, the Biden administration is urging Congress to get this done as soon as possible because it includes a lot of provisions to invest in domestic semiconductor chip production and ease a lot of and invest in more domestic production of goods, so that we can to help ease all the supply chain shortages that we've been seeing in recent months. So it's not clear exactly when that could happen, but in any event, this is the kind of legislation that will require at least 60 votes in the Senate, meaning at least 10 Senate Republicans will have to get on board with this. And so if Republicans will have to be on board for this legislation anyway, Senator Lujan's absence may not affect that as much. But right now, the bill passed in the House on Friday was just one Republican vote. That was from Adam Kinzinger, who is more likely to break with his party these days on a variety of issues. So the House and Senate Democrats have some work to do in whittling this down to a bill that is more bipartisan than what came out of the House.
Christina Marcos, congressional reporter with The Hill, joining C-SPAN on Monday morning's Washington Journal. Also today, the House Appropriations Committee Chair, Rosa DeLauro, Democrat from Connecticut, introducing a short-term bill to keep the government funded through March 11th. This would be at last fiscal year's levels. It would prevent the government shutdown when current funding expires February 18th. This while a longer-term government funding bill is negotiated. It is expected that this short-term bill, known as a CR, continuing resolution, will pass the House this week because House members are not scheduled to be in session next week. Would then pass the Senate in time to avoid that shutdown. If that happens, it'll be the third time this fiscal year that a temporary government bill has been used. The fiscal year started October 2021, so by March 11th, it would be almost half over. From Sky News in Great Britain, gun salutes have been held in honor of the Queen to mark the Official start of her Platinum Jubilee celebrations on the 70th anniversary of her accession. They include a 21-gun salute at Edinburgh Castle, a 41-gun salute at the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery in London's Green Park, and a 62-gun salute at the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London. Sky News also writes, under royal tradition, gun salutes are not held on Sunday, which was the official day of the Queen's accession, and are therefore held the following day. But on Sunday, town criers were out in the street to proclaim the anniversary, including this one in Rye.
Be it known, this day, the 6th of February, is the 70th anniversary of the accession to the throne of our sovereign lady, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith.
The town crier in Rye in East Sussex, England, on Sunday. The start of the Platinum Jubilee for Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, 70 years reigning. That sets the record for a British monarch and also the longest-serving female head of state in history. Many events will be taking place in Britain this year, parties, concerts, parades, and as CNN reports, also the Platinum Pudding Celebration, a nationwide baking competition seeking out a new dessert dedicated to the Queen. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more top Washington stories sent right to you each day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.